The first Marquette Law School poll taken after last week's primary shows a close race for governor and a not-so-close race for U.S. Senate.
Poll Director Charles Franklin is back with us. What can we determine from the turnout of voters?
Well, turnout was very high in the Republican primary, not so high on the Democratic side, though not negligible. But, of course, the Democratic primary effectively wrapped up a couple of weeks earlier when 3 of the top 4 candidates dropped out. I think the high turnout in the Republican primary is interesting. It was a hard-fought race. In the end, Tim Michels won by about 5 points, but that wasn't obvious that that was going to happen in the last week or so.
And we expect Democrats to show up more for the midterms.
Oh, yes. I think one thing that we found in this week's survey is Republicans and Democrats are equally likely to say they're certain they're going to vote this fall. 83% of Republicans, 82% of Democrats. Good deal lower, 66% of independents. That's kind of typical.
You know, Michael's pulling out in front of such a marquee name, former Lieutenant Governor Rebecca Clayfish. I mean, is this a proof that the Trump factor still very much exists in politics?
Yeah, I think what we see in the survey is that among Republicans here in the state, 77% have a favorable view of former President Trump. And so the force that he holds within the party is really strong. At the same time, he's quite unpopular with the public at large. So it's a double-edged sword, very effective within Republican primaries here and as we've seen around the country. But as a matter of the whole electorate, Trump is very much underwater on favorability.
All right, let's look ahead to midterms. Head-to-head in the Senate race, it's Mandela Barnes ahead by quite a bit.
By 7. That is outside the margin of error. The governor's race is inside the margin, but the Senate race, Barnes pulls ahead. He was ahead by 2 before the primary, is ahead by 7 now. The difference is that both parties are 90+% behind their party's nominee. But Barnes is doing very well with independents right now, whereas Evers is just barely ahead with independents. That's the difference between the 2 races, but it's also how Mandela Barnes gets a 7-point lead at this point. Always the caveat, this is August. It's a long, long ways to November.
And Johnson's been the underdog before.
He has, and he's come back before at least twice, if you think his late entry in 2010 made him the underdog then as well.
All right, let's look at the governor's race. It is tight.
It really is.
Very tight. A 2-point margin now. And there, for Evers was ahead by 7 in June, but that was when Michels had just recently gotten in the race. What we see is for Michels and, for that matter, for Barnes, they both got a good deal better known over the course of the summer.
Commercials will do that.
They will do that. And both of them benefited from that greater knowledge. Barnes's margin improved by 5 points. But Michels' margin improved by 5 points. So here you got 2 opposite parties. But after the primary, both of the challengers did 5 points better in the margin on their races. There is still reason to continue advertising, though. 34% say they don't know enough about Tim Michels to have an opinion of him, and it's 41% that don't have an opinion of Mandela Barnes. So the campaign this fall is surely going to alter those numbers as people get to know them, and the campaigns will try to make their guy look good and not so good from the opposition.
Well, beyond the candidates, there's no shortage of issues. What is going to bring those voters out there in terms of those?
Yeah, that's so fascinating. We asked about 9 different issues. Inflation, not surprisingly, is the #1 issue on our list. Gun violence, crime, and abortion in 4th place out of the 9. At the bottom, coronavirus. But there are very different priorities between the 2 parties. Republicans put inflation in 1st place, but crime and illegal immigration are high on their list as well. Democrats, on the other hand, are much more concerned with climate change, gun violence as opposed to crime. The two parties see those in different lights. And then abortion is the third most important for Democrats. So you'll often see these parties talking past one another in the sense that Republicans are concerned about one set of issues, Democrats about another, and independents kind of mix them. The top independent concern is inflation, but the second is gun violence. So on the one hand, they look a little bit more like Republicans that put inflation high, but then they also look more like Democrats worried about gun violence, and independents put crime down towards the bottom of their list.
And 3 months from now, that inflation number may be very different.
It may be. One of the striking things, and kind of a surprise to me, is concern with inflation has risen every survey since last summer until now. Okay. And it dipped down 7 points on concern this month. And that follows the fall in gas prices that we saw during July and early August. And the consumer price index was flat in July compared to June. It doesn't mean overall inflation is less than it was a year ago, but it does mean in the short term both of those have moderated. And so I was really interested to see the public opinion shift in the direction of those macroeconomic measures, because often things happen in the economy and public opinion doesn't necessarily follow them. But in this case, it still came down. Still the #1 issue, nevertheless, but it did come down some.
So independents are going to be the key here.
I think they're very important. Like I said earlier, Evers with a 4-point margin and Barnes with a bigger margin with independents. Big, important thing.
Yeah.
3 months to go, I'm sure.
Long 3 months.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.